Good morning, Antoinette.
Hey, good morning.
We are live.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Sage Turner, the Chair of the Housing and Community Development Committee. I'd like to welcome you to the July 11th meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually today. For those of you out there and with us, welcome. To help the audience follow along, I'll be stating each section of the agenda aloud as we go along. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub. You can find that link on the front page of our city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. To do so, you call 855-925-2801. You'll be prompted for a meeting code, and that is 9791. We also have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To do so, you'll use the same phone number. It's 855-925-2801 and meeting code 9791. At that time, you'll be muted, but you'll be able to hear the meeting live. And to get in the queue, you push *3. Okay, I'm going to do a roll call and introduce the committee members and staff. If you could just come off mute real quickly and say a quick hello. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Shanika Smith may join us. She's currently in another city meeting and may possibly join us late. Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Community Economic Development Director Nikki Reed.
Good morning.
Homeless Strategy Division Manager Emily Ball.
Hey, good morning.
I think that's everyone. Looks like it. Okay. Let's get to the agenda. We have a few things today. First is the approval of the minutes. I guess I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Second.
We'll roll call vote each other. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Myself, aye. All right. Minutes are approved. So quickly moving on to item number 2. This is a continuum of care update, and Emily Ball is going to walk us through it. Take it away, Emily. Thank you.
All right, good morning. I'm always glad to be with you all, glad to tell you about what's happening in the continuum of care. We have a lot going on. I think it's been a really exciting time as the continuum of care is restructured and relaunched. So I'm glad to be able to share that with you. Key takeaways: new continuum of care is up and running. We have great momentum in the community around this right now. We have 330 continuum of care members so far. Membership is open on an ongoing basis, so we expect that number to continue to grow. The continuum of care is providing clear structure and decision-making process for our community work together on homelessness and really clarifying community roles and responsibilities, including our role at the city as the lead agency for the continuum of care. Continuum of Care membership has adopted a charter and elected a new board, and that board is already laying the foundation for strategic work ahead. So participating in training, establishing a funding committee and a shelter planning work group, vetting potential new projects, and that revamped Continuum of Care framework is really creating a platform for overall community collaboration in a much more effective way than we've had in the past. COC membership activities. The first COC membership meeting was held February 29th, where they adopted the first ever Continuum of Care charter that we've had in this community. That charter details roles, responsibilities, and processes for the membership, the board, committees, work groups, for us as the lead agency, and for us as the HMIS lead. That is a high impact infrastructure for us already. Again, just not something that we've had in our community in the past. So we now have better clarity than we've had before on how decisions are made about homelessness in our community, who those decision makers are, how those folks are seated in decision-making seats, and who they are accountable to. And the charter clarifies the city's role as lead agency, that our function is to come up underneath that structure, to support it, to provide process administration, and to provide information to those decision makers. The second Continuum of Care meeting was held April 25th, and at that meeting, the group heard point-in-time count results and elected their first board, which immediately replaces HIAC. So HIAC, the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, has been really on double duty as an advisory committee in the city structure and has been the designated Continuum of Care board. Continuum of Care are self-governing bodies, and so as soon as the new Continuum of Care membership elected a new board, that immediately removes that COC board designation from HIAC to the new board. HIAC, of course, continues as a city advisory committee until an anticipated dissolution. Based on the COC charter, the board has 19 voting seats and 2 non-voting liaisons. So 15 of those voting seats are representative. Those are sector-based seats open to continuum of care members to apply as long as they meet the criteria for that sector and have 3 letters of support from other COC members. And then those seats are fully elected by the COC membership. There are also 4 appointed seats for governmental partners. Those are standing seats by entity. So the organization there appoints its own board member, and then those appointments are ratified by the COC membership. And then there are 2 non-voting liaisons, one from City Council and one from County Commissioners. So you can see here who's on the Continuum of Care Board that was elected at that April meeting. We have 2 folks who are subject matter experts with lived experience of homelessness, healthcare system representative, behavioral healthcare system representative, unsheltered service provider, shelter and transitional housing provider, permanent housing provider, victim service provider, public safety, and then a community member representative seat. In the appointed and non-voting liaison seats, we have the Asheville Housing Authority, Buncombe County, City of Asheville, City Manager Deborah Campbell is in that seat, and then the Veterans Administration. Parker Sloan is representing Buncombe County Commissioners, and Mayor Manheimer is representing Asheville City Council. And then there are 5 additional representative board seats that are not yet filled, so there will be a second round of board elections to round those out. Those are business community, faith community, community member, local non-governmental funders, and then supportive provider network. COC board activities so far include appointing a funding committee. You'll hear more about that this morning. Funding committee was appointed in May, and you can see the membership there. That funding committee will review applications and will make recommendations on the federal funding that our community receives for homelessness, that's Emergency Solutions Grant and the Continuum of Care program. And also we'll do an overall review of community funding to understand how we are paying for homelessness response in our community now and what other opportunities we have to be more strategic in that resource allocation and to identify new opportunities that the COC might pursue. That committee was also assigned responsibility to vet the Ramada project proposal, and that's your second agenda item this morning. So you'll hear me reference that in the next few slides, but you'll get a detailed presentation about that in just a bit. COC board has also established a shelter planning work group that was open to any COC board member, open to participants in the shelter planning team that has been meeting over the past few months, that has been HIAC city and county folks that you've heard about. And then also all current shelter providers in the COC. So you can see who's appointed to that shelter planning work group. Lacey Hoyle at Buncombe County is chairing that group. Rachel Wood is participating in that, along with a number of other community representatives. Shelter planning work group has met to identify unmet shelter needs, review the planning efforts to date, conducted some advisor sessions open to Continuum of Care members to provide input about what's needed for shelter in our community, and is anticipating issuing a request for partnership next week to the Continuum of Care to identify partners who might be able to add shelter capacity. That work group then will review proposals received, confirm partners, and develop an overall plan to meet unmet shelter needs. Present that plan to the COC board in August for approval, and that plan would include a proposal to submit to Buncombe County for ARPA funding consideration. And then would follow through with submitting that proposal based on board approval from the Continuum of Care. Board also established a vetting process for any proposal received for funding for permanent supportive housing at the Ramada. Again, this is an upcoming agenda item for you this morning. So the process established was to hear a presentation from the proposer to the COC board, that the board would then identify any additional due diligence needed and assign that to the funding committee to complete. Funding committee would report findings back to the COC board, and then the board would approve by vote a recommendation to you all prior to any council consideration of a funding request. Board has also participated in 2 days of training with a HUD technical assistance provider on the Continuum of Care framework and board responsibilities, really focused on level setting and just foundation building in advance of their strategic planning work that they'll begin this fall. During that time, they also held a business meeting where they appointed that shelter work group, elected board officers. You can see those folks there. Melina Arrowwood is the board chair, April Burgess Johnson is vice chair, and Christian Chambers is secretary. And then at their meeting June 20th, they heard a presentation from the proposers on the Ramada project. At the COC membership meeting on June 20th, members had an opportunity to provide input to the board on what's working well, what opportunities the COC has, and what the board should be prioritizing. So again, really trying to set the stage for upcoming strategic planning and helping the board understand what's most important to folks in the community related to homelessness. And members also had an opportunity to provide input to the board on the Ramada proposal. Funding processes are underway. The Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG, is now open. That is about $123,000. Those applications are due locally tomorrow. And then the funding committee will review and make their recommendations to the COC board, and then we'll submit based on COC board approval by the August 26th deadline. And then the COC funding competition, which is about $2 million, we expect that to open in the coming weeks. And then on the horizon, there will be a second board election to fill those remaining 5 seats, and the board will finalize appointments to the other standing committees that were identified in the charter. Couple staff updates from us in the Homeless Strategy Division. Our role, of course, is to fulfill the city's responsibility as the designated lead agency for the continuum of care. We have published a new web page on the city's site for the continuum of care that includes an overview and the charter, membership forms, and all of the meeting materials so that folks in the public can stay up to date on the work of the continuum of care. And then we will continue to support HIAC. We do continue to support HIAC. Their next meeting is July 25th. And at that meeting, they are anticipated to vote on a recommendation to you all that you dissolve that committee in order to consolidate homelessness response efforts through the continuum of care. There are 3 HIAC members who are COC board members and other HIAC folks who are participating in committees and work groups elsewhere in the COC. So we expect that they will recommend a dissolution of HIAC. So again, key takeaways, a lot going on in the continuum of care. We've got a lot of momentum, a lot of participation in this from across the community. And we are teed up for future strategic planning work that should really guide those efforts going forward. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Wow, that's a great update. I mean, that's an incredible amount of work and an incredible amount of volunteers and just experience. I'm impressed and I'm very thankful. That's a lot of committees. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's a lot. Thank you for this. And thank you to everybody who's been participating this long. It's quite a group. Councilwoman Mosley, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't have any questions, but I will say I concur with everything you just said, Sage. This is an incredible amount of work and it's very impressive. And thank you, Emily, for taking the lead on all of this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's exciting. I think it really has been a missing piece in our community, and I'm excited about where we're headed.
It's wonderful. We've known for a long time. We have great partners, great programs, great organizations working in the community, and this whole just meshing of them together so professionally is tremendous. Thank you. Thanks for being here to share the update too. Okay, back to our agenda. Okay, that concludes item number 2. And we're moving on to item number 3, also with Emily, and really curious to hear more about this. So go ahead.
Great. So I've mentioned this before that the COC has established city has received a proposal. COC had established a process around that. So we're going to walk you through the bones of that proposal and the process, and then share some specific updates with you this morning. So City has received a new proposal for funding for permanent supportive housing at 148 River Ford Parkway, which is the former Ramada. As you know, in 2021, the city allocated $1.5 million in funding for supportive services for the previous permanent supportive housing project at Ramada. Project didn't go forward. No city funds have ever been released or paid. So that funding is still available. Those funds were originally sourced as $500,000 in ARPA funding and $1 million in city general capital funds. The city has committed to working with and through the continuum of care for future planning efforts on homelessness response, recognizing, as we just talked about, that this critical issue is best addressed through that framework of collaborative decision-making. That COC vetting process is underway, and the final COC recommendation is anticipated in August related to this project. Background, again, City Council had previously authorized $1.5 million for 3 years of supportive services for 100+ units of permanent supportive housing at the former Ramada. And the city was able to secure a 50-year deed restriction on property for supportive housing for chronically homeless persons that does convey to any new buyer. The original project didn't go forward. Stormfield Capital now owns that property, and the city again retains those originally authorized funds. Friendship for Affordable Housing is an affordable housing developer that is now under contract with Stormfield Capital to purchase the property to create supportive housing. So that would be 50 units for veterans and 50 units for people exiting chronic homelessness. Friendship for Affordable Housing has submitted a proposal to the city for $1.5 million for 3 years of supportive services. Those folks are with us this morning, so you'll have a chance to hear from them in just a moment. To be clear, this is not an ask. We're not seeking any action from you on this. This is just an update on the process at this point. Basic overview of the proposal. Again, Friendship is a private developer using private funds to purchase and renovate the property, and they've chosen local implementation partners. So this is a map of who does what in the proposed project at that property. Friendship would be the developer and the owner, using private capital for that. Asheville Housing Authority would provide 100 project-based vouchers. Those were previously committed to the previous project, so are still available. Vouchers, of course, are federally funded by HUD. Homeward Bound would provide property management through a contract directly with Friendship for Affordable Housing. And then on-site supportive services would be provided in 2 ways by 2 partners. So the Charles George VA Medical Center here locally would provide on-site supportive services for 50 veterans, and the staff for that would be supported through federal VA funding. So none of that would come through any other partner, but direct federal funding to the VA Medical Center to create that staff capacity. Homeward Bound would provide on-site supportive services for 50 formerly chronically homeless residents. That's the local funding piece that would pair with the federal and private funding for the overall project flow. Again, city has committed to coordinating homelessness response through the continuum of care. So city staff asked the COC board to establish a vetting process for any proposal received. The board did hear a presentation from Friendship for Affordable Housing at their June 20th meeting, and then assigned due diligence to the funding committee. So shared some additional information with the funding committee that they specifically wanted follow up on. And the funding committee presented a progress update to the Continuum of Care board yesterday at their meeting. Brian Methvin is the chair of the funding committee and shared that update with the COC board last night. And he is with us this morning, going to share the same update with you all using the same slides that were presented to that board last night. So I will invite him to take it away.
Great, thank you, Emily. So this is the same, as Emily mentioned, this is exactly what we presented to the COC board last night. You just go on to the next slide. So let me just give you a picture of what we've been doing over the last several weeks. We collected a set of questions from the COC board, our funding committee members, and other stakeholders in the process. We consolidated all those questions and sent them on to Friendship for Affordable Housing and to Homeward Bound. We've also been conducting web research on Friendship for Affordable Housing and their parent company. We have collected some resident feedback from folks at Compass Point Village to understand how well Homeward Bound is managing that complex from a resident perspective. We then went through a process to review the written responses we got back from Friendship and from Homeward Bound on the questions we'd asked them, and had a joint review with them last week to go through their written responses and have a discussion around the open questions that we had, plus any issues that came up as a result of that. Yes, and Councilmember Mosley.
Good to see you, Brian, and sorry
Good to
for
see you.
interrupting. But my interest is piqued when I see you collected resident feedback from Compass Point Village. I guess my question is twofold. Can you explain the process for collecting that information? And also, what was the feedback?
Sure. So we have two people with lived experience on our committee, and they went out and talked with a number of people, residents, some of which they had personal relationships with, others they didn't. So they went out and gathered feedback in that way. And then I went out there and did a tour of the facility and spoke with 5 different people who are residents there. We got a mixture of feedback. Some residents were telling us they thought there were too many restrictions on the property in terms of their personal freedoms. Others thought it was too loose of an environment. So it was very difficult from that perspective to tell if Homeward Bound is striking the right balance or not. Probably the biggest piece of feedback that we went over with Homeward Bound and they recognize is an issue is substance abuse use on the property. They have been undertaking a number of steps to try to control visitor traffic on the property. They've got now 180 visitors that are not allowed back on the property, a lot of which are people they suspected of trying to traffic and drug or creating other disturbances on the property. But that was probably one of the things that several residents mentioned, was that it was difficult to maintain sobriety in that environment or keep from drug use just because of the amount of drugs that are available in that environment. Now, we did try to get some references to how much that is an endemic problem to Compass Point versus other communities in Asheville. And from what we understand from security personnel that also work at several of the public housing complexes, is that that's a similar problem that we have in some of our public housing complexes, that the availability of drugs and alcohol is quite prevalent, and therefore it's difficult for people who want to try to maintain sobriety in those environments.
Did any of the residents express safety concerns, or did anyone say that they felt safe or unsafe?
We did not get anybody who felt that there was undue safety concerns. There have been some incidents on the property, but no one brought up those incidents as complaints during the interview process we did. And I think it is a continual challenge for Homeward Bound operating that property, as it likely will be for the Ramada, just in terms of the amount of visitor traffic that these facilities create. They're private residences, and as private residences, people are open to have guests so long as they comply with the rules. But the problem is people come in and don't comply with the rules and then have to be excluded. So it is a continual challenge that they will face here and that they will probably face at the Ramada. So what we have done after we met with Homeward Bound and Friendship, we gave them the feedback that I just was talking to you about that we raised from residents. We had some good discussions around steps that they might be able to take. We went through their question responses, and then we summarized for them all of our open questions that we have that we thought had to be resolved before we could bring a report to the COC board. So our findings to date, one, we believe this project remains a very economically viable project for the community, and that the permanent supportive housing that it would create is a very desperately needed asset in our community. So the funding committee, however, we don't think we had sufficient information to make any type of recommendation for the COC board to proceed. Nor did we believe that Friendship for Affordable Housing and Homeward Bound had fully formed their relationship to the point where we felt comfortable that we could move forward in commenting on a proposal that they had. So, and that's one of the things that we discussed in detail with Homeward Bound and with Friendship for Affordable Housing at our meeting last week. So they have now undertaken a number of steps. One, Friendship's going to provide our funding committee with some additional information on their corporate structure, their financial condition, and where they'll be obtaining funds from. Some of which is capital they already have, and other is capital that they would seek to be borrowing from lines of credit or permanent bank financing. And we're expected to receive that information from them here in the next few days. And then Homeward Bound and Friendship for Affordable Housing are working on their business and their operational relationship. So, some of those elements really wouldn't be involved in the city contract for the property because, as Emily mentioned earlier, security and maintenance are not under the cost structure, that $1.5 million that the city would be funding. Those elements of the Homeward Bound and Friendship relationship will be paid for directly by the property, so directly by Friendship for Affordable Housing. But we thought they were essential that those elements would be ironed out and agreed to in principle before we move forward with the proposal. Homeward Bound also requested some additional time so that their board could complete the contractual discussions with Friendship for Affordable Housing, also do an organizational readiness review to ensure that adding the Ramada property wouldn't unduly strain their capacity, and then to overall ratify their commitment to the project. So both Homeward Bound and Friendship for Affordable Housing have also stated to us that their participation is contingent upon obtaining project-based vouchers. Again, as Emily mentioned a minute ago, those have been largely allocated by the Housing Authority, but have not formally been contractually authorized. So next steps for our committee, we're actively involved with both Homeward Bound clearing up and Homeward Bound and Friendship clearing up our remaining questions. They're going to submit a revised proposal to our funding committee, and then we'll go through that to make sure that they fully addressed all of our issues and concerns that have come up to date. And then we will make a report to the COC board at its August meeting, and then that board's recommendation would then come back to HCD at your next scheduled meeting and give you a chance to see all of the due diligence material that we have created, as well as the COC's recommendation to you. So I don't know if there's any questions on that.
Well, Brian, first of all, just a big thank you for your leadership on this and for taking the chair role. This is a lot of great information. I'll share that I had concerns when I saw that it was Homeward Bound only because of capacity reasons, and I'm not clear if they have a new executive director yet. So I found comfort in the fact that you all pushed on that a little and that they also self-admitted we may not be ready for this. What is the timeline? Is there a timeline on this relationship building?
Yeah, so what we have set out for them as a preliminary timeline is that they would give materials back to our committee by July 30th. And our committee is scheduled to meet on August the 2nd to review that. We don't go back to the COC board until the
August 15th.
August 15th, thank you, Emily. So what we're anticipating having our report ready for the COC board by the 8th of August, which is when their meeting materials have to be published.
And do we know anything about the overall timeline, due diligence periods for this group, the real estate transaction, anything? Are there any hard deadlines that we have to meet?
So in just a moment, we're going to have the people from Friendship for Affordable Housing. They'll come on and do an overview, and they can probably better speak to any due diligence timeframes they have set up with Stormfield Capital.
Okay.
Again, they have a contract agreement in principle to purchase the property, but have not closed on it.
Okay. And then for our own city staff, the 1.5 million, is council going to have to vote on this again?
Yeah.
Okay, both pieces. And then the 1 million, it was 500 from ARPA, and it said 1 million from general capital, but it was specific to affordable housing capital, right? Okay. And And then rumblings in the past when we're doing some of our bigger conditional zonings is that project-based vouchers, yeah, we're having to do some contractual language just in case they're not available. Do we have any concerns about these vouchers and their availability? Is there plenty? If this whole deal hinges on it, is there anything to know there?
I'm happy to speak to that. The Housing Authority had previously allocated 100 project-based vouchers for that property, and Monique affirmed last night that those are still tagged for this project in that location. So I don't think there are any concerns about availability.
Perfect, perfect. And I noticed Councilwoman Smith has joined us. Welcome. You're able to chime in on some of that. Councilwoman Mosley or Smith, do you have any questions or comments before we hear from Friendship, the FUFA?
Yeah, I do, but it might be a question for Friendship. I was wondering how the connection between Friendship and Homeward Bound came to be in the first place. What made me wonder about that is the section here that says they're kind of working on getting to know each other better. So I'm wondering why Homeward Bound was selected in the first place. I just want to make sure we're not putting our thumb on anything. And also, is there going to be an ask from the county for funding? And then the third question, while I'm thinking about it, is for what purposes would these funds be used? Would it be for operations or for the purchasing of the property?
So the funds that are allocated are just for supportive services for Homeward Bound, managing the 50 of the 100 units that are in the project. So, and that's really essentially case management services for those individuals.
And oh, by the way, do we know if Compass Point is at capacity?
They are 2 people under capacity as of last night's meeting. One of the issues, and I think those units are not being occupied because I believe because there's something wrong with the unit. Not that they can't find someone. So when I was out there last week, someone had broken a plate glass window that if you've been out there, the units are like an old motel. So you got a plate glass window and a door, and someone broke one of the windows, and it makes the unit not eligible for occupancy from HUD's perspective. And that's been a problem for them out there. They've had like 5 different times the windows have been broken. That would not be an issue at the Ramada, since it's a motel or a hotel structure with interior hallways, and the units only have windows that face the exterior of the building. But yeah, to your question on how Homeward Bound was selected, that is a much better question for our folks from Friendship for Affordable Housing.
Do you have a question? Do you know about the county ask?
Oh, county funding, yes. So right now there is 2 things. When Friendship for Affordable Housing originally submitted the ask to us, it was for the $1.5 million over 3 years. They're now trying to work with Homeward Bound to stretch that money over 4 years rather than 3. And there also have been in discussions with the county about trying to get money from county sources from the opioid settlement, as well as from their affordable housing bond fund. And I can let them speak to that in those fundraising efforts. But to date, the county has not committed any funds to this project.
And really, one last one. Can you send us a copy of these proposals?
Yes, I can. So no, the proposal I can send you is the one, it will be outdated. So it might be better to wait until we get a revised proposal, because some of the things in it will change. But I can send you the one from before so you can look through, and it shows you like Friendship for Affordable Housing, who their team is, some of their background material on, so you can familiarize yourself with that. But the actual financials for the project will likely change as Homeward Bound and then revise their numbers.
Thank you.
So if there's no other questions for me, I think we can bring on the folks from Friendship for Affordable Housing, and they can give you an overview of their organization, why they're interested in doing affordable housing in Asheville, and answer some of your specific questions.
Great, thank you. Who here is with, I actually am not sure, is it Ari? Who's Callum?
Ari and Callum are from Friendship for Affordable Housing.
Okay, great. Welcome, Ari.
Thank you.
Ari and Callum.
Thank you. Nice to meet you all. Yes, I'll just briefly answer, Councilman Antoinette. I will quickly answer how we met Homeward Bound and just that process there. So when we first came to Asheville with this project, we obviously wanted to source locally, and that will spread across the entire model in terms of the architect, the GC, etc. We met with Homeward Bound on the advice of Jerry from the VA, and actually David Nash, the former CEO of the Housing Authority, who's a good friend of ours. And we met with ABCCM, we met with Scott and some of his team as well. So we kind of interviewed them both, got along with them both brilliantly. Obviously, both have the same mission as we do, which is housing 113 people at this site. We chose Homeward Bound just because of their work with Compass Point. We felt that it was fresh in their minds, whatever, I don't want to say mistakes, but whatever maybe errors that have happened on that site could be learned from. The Housing First experience was a huge plus for us. So I wanted to start answering that because I don't think Brian could.
Thank you. And nice to have you here. Looks like Brian, you were going to follow up. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I'm okay.
So you're saying you chose them because you have a preference for Housing First and ABCCM doesn't necessarily?
We just felt they had more experience with what we wanted to do on the site effectively. Not that ABCCM weren't great and do great things, and Scott was incredibly professional. It was more just that they edged them just purely because of their experience.
Okay, thanks.
Callum, can you speak to what was the other question we had for you? Someone mentioned it. Oh, let me see if I wrote it down. Oh, the timeline around any kind of closing procedures.
Yes.
Diligence.
So it really depends on when we can close. So basically, per the contract we have, the option to purchase, we need the 100 project-based vouchers and the city funding, basically to close on the building. What that looks like can be, obviously contingent award letters, but effectively we need them applied to the site so we can both put it to lenders, both to the capitalization of the project. So that's the initial timeline. Obviously, we are working with Brian in his capacity, and he's doing brilliantly to try and make this as quickly as possible without skipping any form of due diligence. We will get, we've already sent an MOU to Homeward Bound, so they're reviewing that now. We have a long call this afternoon to go over all the deliverables. And we aim to send something, at least a draft of the final proposal next week to Brian so he can review it and see if there's anything else he needs before July 30th. Effectively, we have, we're very in the fortunate position to have drawings that are ready to go. Matt, who's the director of development for us, he's been meeting with GCs again. A local GC we'll be working with. I'll let Matt speak more specifically to that. But then from there, from that point onwards, it would probably take us 9 to 12 months to build the site. I'm giving you a conservative timeline because I don't want to say 6 or 7 months, then it'd be 12. I want to say 12 just in case it's, you guys can be pleasantly surprised. And that's roughly our timeline. And obviously during construction, we'll be dialing down the exact operational budget of the first 2 years, which is obviously the most difficult with this business model, and working with Homeward Bound just to make sure that everything is ready to go when we house the I just want to make a brief correction as well and I'm sorry, Emily, but it won't just be 100 units, it'll be 113. I know that's a small margin, but it is 13 more rooms for 13 individuals. Even though we won't have vouchers for those, we'll be working with Homeward Bound to source the tenant-based vouchers, which they, or working with Jerry, because he said he would absolutely have no issue in filling them with 13 more veterans. So just wanted to make that slight correction.
Great. Antoinette?
So Callum, are you saying without the local funding, you won't be able to close on this project? And if so, what is your plan for funding after the 3 or maybe 4 year period?
Of course,
if
great
the funding is for strictly supportive services?
Of course, it's a great question. So we, as Brian correctly said, we're working with Lacey and Buncombe County. We were introduced to Jonathan Jones, a good friend of ours, and the Affordable Housing Bond. So we'll be working with him. I believe the application opens for that in December. Want to make it clear that even though we are going to stretch these funding over 4 years, we won't start looking for additional funding in year 4. We'll start looking in year 1. We want to make sure we have these commitments, or at least an idea of what the commitments will look like from the moment we set off, just to make sure we have that supportive services, we have that longevity, and there isn't a panic in the final hours when we're looking for funding. So the funding procurement process will be ongoing. And in terms of the vouchers on the operational side, assure that longevity for us as well. Obviously, it's a HAP contract, and I believe it's 20 years, the HAP contract with the Housing Authority, and that will allow us to maintain operational assurance and longevity regarding the security, the maintenance, the utilities, and all that regarding the site. And as Brian correctly said, the 1.5 that we're asking from the city will be directly to Homeward Bound and their capacity as the supportive services and property manager. The specific financials of that, as Brian also correctly said, are dialed down slightly, but obviously they need to be a lot more specific, and we are working on that with them. So there'll be a lot more clarity to where your generous grant will be going.
Thank you. Councilwoman, any other questions? I guess, Callum, maybe I didn't quite hear it in your answer, but your contract, I mean, I think this was a foreclosure. So do you have till the end of the year to make this deal, or what dead?
Yes, Stormfield have been, I want to say, somewhat patient, but also, as I'm sure everyone on this call can appreciate, a very kind of a slight hangover from the previous deal. They're not impatient is maybe the wrong word. They're certainly working well with us, knowing that we have to go through the correct due diligence process, right? I know Emily and Nikki have spoken to them also. Originally, they wanted us to close in April, so it just gives you a good idea of how many times we've gone back to them saying, look, the city need to do what the city need to do. It's absolutely appropriate given what happened before, and we are very happy to work with them on that. We're working as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But the fact is that with the various communities who need to do this essential due diligence, it's impossible to do it at a timeline that they would like to do. From the outside, they're not really privy to the amount of committees that are going on and who are assessing this. But we are working with them. I don't know, Emily can speak to it a bit more in terms of the recent conversation. We removed from the July to the August timeline just because we needed to do a little bit more work to make sure the funding committee were happy to present. But we will be hopefully closing in August, and to my knowledge, Stormfield have accepted it.
Okay, great. Nikki, I saw your hand go up, and could you please also, when you're speaking, reference when this might come to council?
Absolutely. I wanted to also provide information about that source of funding. So, because this is critical with respect to the timeline. And so we do have ARPA funds included in this proposed funding for this project. And so we do need to take action on those ARPA funds really as soon as possible. We had initially hoped to bring this forward to the July 23rd council. At this point, we will plan to visit the HCD committee again in August. So I think that's August 20th is the date there. And you'll note that that is going to be post the COC vote. So we're going to time that out such that HCD can hear the outcome of the continuum of care review. And then we hope to proceed to the August 27th City Council, where a vote will be taken regarding that funding. And Callum, there was a part of Councilmember Mosley's question that I'd hoped you would address specifically, and that is the contingency around this funding as to whether or not you will proceed with purchasing the property if the funding isn't awarded. I don't think I heard that. If you could address that.
Well, the simple answer is no. Sadly, the voucher revenue does not cover the budget that we'll be working with on Homeward Bound. We like to split these up into the operational maintenance is often with the voucher revenue and the general property income, and then supportive services we often look for separate sources of income. We will be revising the pro forma for Brian and his team, but you'll see that it's just not possible to move forward without the 1.5 covering those 4 years of supportive services.
Go ahead, Antoinette.
I appreciate that. It just dawned on me that I actually had another question for Brian, if you're ready to field it. I'm still going back to and I'm so happy that y'all took the time to speak to the people who are actually currently at Compass Point. I really, really appreciate that. I'm also wondering, and I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up because we hear from community members who have public safety concerns. And I believe there was an article, a couple of months ago about an unusually, or what is perceived as an unusually high number of calls for service. And since the Ramada is in the same district for servicing, I'm wondering if that has been taken into consideration and what public safety folks think about it. Would it result in a increase in response time, say if you're living in Kenilworth or someone living in Oakley or someone living in East Asheville? If that's something y'all haven't looked into, is that something you plan on looking into?
So far, it is not something that we've looked into, but I will add it to our list and make sure that we do a public safety review as well. The property in question at the Ramada and the deed restriction the city's already placed around it means that the only use for that property for the next 50 years is as a permanent supportive housing location. So I think the question back to public safety is how will we accommodate that in that district, given the likely additional burden of calls? Because it's the only use for that property.
Well, let me just, my legal mind just tweaked. Actually, it's the only use for now. The city could also change that use.
Absolutely, you're right.
As of right now, that is the use.
Yes, that's correct. But yeah, we did follow up with Homeward Bound on the calls, and they really fell into two camps. One of which was Homeward Bound employees calling APD for service, particularly around guest traffic and getting guests who refuse to leave out of the property. And they've now, and I think that's one of the problems that they had on the startup of this, is that sort of everyone was allowed in at first and then only had their privileges, guest privileges, revoked once they created a disturbance. And so I think that was part of the problem, is that there's initially a higher level of calls that come through as you build up the people who are going to be problematic in visiting the facility. One of the things I think that will be helpful as they transition and open the Ramada is moving that same list of people who are not allowed into Compass Point Village to make sure they're not allowed immediately into the Ramada as well, and maintaining a joint list between the properties. And that will probably help better ensure both resident safety as well as broader community safety in that area.
Thank you, Brian. Rachel?
And just to follow up on public safety engagement, I did want to note that one of the many fantastic aspects of the continuum of care is that Chief Lamb is actually a board member. So Chief Lamb has received this update. Chief Lamb will be a part of the board who will be voting in August. And then we have had a few staff meetings directly with Homeward Bound, just talking about public safety concerns and then leadership transitions. And Chief Lamb has been a part of all of those conversations. So just wanted to let you know, Councilmember Mosley, that he is familiar with this project and has been consulted.
Okay, great. I knew he was on the continuum of care. Great. It's good to know. Because really what I'm asking for, quite frankly, is as the liaison to the housing authority, I've heard of repeated instances of calls from the housing authority residents across the street. So that's really where I was going with that.
Emily, go ahead.
If I can chime in on one piece of that, I know some of those concerns have been related to the bus stop that's right in front of Asheville Terrace and across from Compass Point Village. And our team convened a meeting about that with Compass Point Village, with Sunrise, who also has a presence in that area, and with APD and community responders earlier this week to troubleshoot some issues around that location in particular. They have a follow-up meeting in a couple of weeks, but I think there is good work underway to get some of those issues resolved.
Oh, that's great to know, because really what I'm hoping to prevent is calls similar to the ones we get from businesses and others around A-Hope That's really where I'm heading, because we're still getting those calls.
Thank you. Great discussion, everyone. Anything else to add before we move on? Any other questions? Okay. Staff, did you need any action from us today on this? No. Okay. Great. Thank you. For those of you who are listening in, the thousands of you, that concludes item number 3 on our agenda, and we are moving to item number 4, which is to discuss our work plan. Those of you who have been joining for other conversations can drop off now if you like. And it looks like Rachel's going to walk us through this. Go ahead, Rachel.
Sure. Good morning again, everyone, and happy fiscal new year. So the intent behind today's presentation is twofold. One, we want to take an opportunity to celebrate some of the success that we've had over the course of fiscal year 2024, which of course just ended June 30th. And a lot of that success is thanks to the leadership of this team and the leadership of the Housing and Community Development Committee. And then want to start preliminary conversations around what we've got planned for fiscal year 2025. We'll have a follow-up discussion with you all in August where we start to assign some dates. But today is really a high-level preliminary conversation just to make sure that we aren't missing any key items that you want this committee to be focused on over the course of this new fiscal year. You can go to the next slide, Katie. Okay, so as a quick reminder, your annual work plan for the Housing and Community Development Committee really is a tool just to help better plan and organize your work. Your work plans are informed by your annual strategic priorities and goal statements, which are of course established during your annual budget retreat. And the work plan is also informed by your committee scope of work. Work plans include a combination of ongoing administrative items along with policy considerations that include specific assignments for advisory boards and other committees. And the conversations that we just had regarding the continuum of care work is a great example of where we're trying to have more intentionality and connectivity between our advisory boards and the council committees. City Council's committee work plans are intended to be dynamic living documents that serve as an overall guide to support the work of council committees, also provide clarity and direction to staff, and then provide additional support and direction to those advisory board members as they are going throughout the fiscal year. Next slide, Katie. So quick reminder of your scope of work, and scope of works were last revised and looked at in fall of 2022. At that time, it was agreed that the Housing and Community Development Committee will review policy updates and make policy recommendations that enhance the quality of life in Asheville and the livability of neighborhoods on all matters relating to the creation and maintenance of housing within the city, including public housing and affordable private housing. The committee will also review policy matters related to solving homelessness and the provision of services to unhoused individuals within the city, and the committee will oversee the city's investments in federal housing and urban development, or HUD, funding programs, and that includes CDBG and HOME, to address a wide range of community development needs. Next slide, Katie. And then along with your scope of work, whenever we discussed what this committee should be focused on, key policy topic areas were identified. Those include housing affordability and supply, housing incentives, homelessness, and then the HUD, CDBG, and home investments. Next slide, Katie. So a quick reminder of your FY24 strategic priority alignment, and this is as we're looking backwards at some of the success that we had over the course of the last fiscal year. There are 2 strategic priorities that are most closely aligned with the body of work of this committee, and those are equitable and affordable housing and stability, as well as houselessness strategies. And then in FY24, you all added strategic priority goal statements that provided a little more specificity and direction to staff that when you say equitable and affordable housing and stability, what does that mean and what do you want to see for the upcoming fiscal year? And that's been really helpful to inform staff as we prioritize our work throughout the year. So the goal for equitable and affordable housing and stability was maximize tools, plans, and regulations to increase housing supply, prioritize access for low-income residents' households, reduce barriers to construction, and begin preparing to update the Unified Development Ordinance and initiating the 2024 Housing Bond. And then under houselessness strategies, the goal is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring by supporting the implementation of National Alliance to End Homelessness recommendations. Next slide, please, Katie. So as I mentioned with the key takeaway slide, and thanks to the pilot and leadership of this committee, we really are focusing for all 6 city council committees on having better connectivity from the council committee to staff and to the advisory boards, just to help the advisory boards have a little more structure around what they're focused on, and then having more connectivity for them to report their status back to council committees directly. So the most direct connection to advisory boards in this committee are the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and that's AHAC, and that's a city council advisory board. And then we've got city and county regional advisory committees that also have some touch points with this committee. That includes the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium and the Continuum of Care, which you just received a great update on from Emily Ball. Next slide, please. So looking backward at what we've accomplished over the course of the last fiscal year, this is a snapshot. By no means is this everything that this committee has provided leadership on, but did just want to take an opportunity to celebrate some of that success. So as a reminder, back in November of 2023, you all recommended to council some policy revisions to the Housing Trust Fund that clarified program priorities and assisted with the application review and award recommendation process. And those policy revisions then led into Housing Trust Fund awards, which were made at the end of calendar year 2023 and approved by council in April. Those recommended awards totaled $4.8 million from the Housing Trust Fund to support the construction or purchase of 197 affordable housing units. And this action actually obligated all remaining 2016 affordable housing GO bonds. So that's a huge accomplishment, and really appreciate the leadership of this committee as we've gotten far more sophisticated and efficient in the allocation of those Housing Trust Fund dollars. Also continued work in our alignment with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. And as a reminder, that really was our pilot for having more intentional connectivity with advisory boards. Through retreats and effective work planning, we've really worked to improve opportunities to leverage that expertise and skill set of AHAC and also of our other advisory boards as a result of the feedback we've gotten from AHAC and policy review efforts and other items on committee work plans. You all just had your work session on the Affordable Housing Plan update, but of course, this committee has been integral in the approval and the work that's happened to date for us to select a firm to conduct the Affordable Housing Plan update. That process began in September of 2023 and is nearing completion, and it's involved the assessment of the city's current affordable housing toolkit and prioritized implementation strategy. And that implementation strategy really is the basis for several of the items that you'll see on our draft FY 2025 work plan. And then the Continuum of Care establishment. In alignment with the recommendations from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the city has supported the establishment of a new COC structure, and a lot of that credit is due to Emily Ball and the leadership of Nikki Reed to get as far as we have gone, to coordinate and guide the community's response to homelessness. Next slide, please, Katie. So again, just before I launch into FY25, want to thank this committee for your leadership in FY24. I think it was a great year, and we're really starting to hit our stride with effective work planning and also effective connectivity between council committees, staff, and those advisory boards. So looking on the horizon for our brand new fiscal year, some of the potential work plan topics that we are looking at under homelessness strategies include further discussions with this committee on high access shelter. There is a shelter planning work group, which I'm actually a part of on the Continuum of Care that's working right now. An RFP is going to hit the streets actually next week for consideration of some county funding that's available to support this effort. So we'll be using this committee over the next several months to provide updates on that body of work and to discuss potential funding considerations from the city's side to support that effort. We'll also have a Continuum of Care strategic plan development. So we anticipate having Emily come back throughout the year to provide updates on that strategic plan and then provide more broadly updates on the progress that's being made to the COC. Under equitable and affordable housing and stability, there is a lot going on. There's a lot going on at the Planning and Economic Development Committee from the regulatory side, and then there's a lot happening in the space of policy review work, as well as refining our incentives, our affordable housing tools for HCD. So looking at the next year, one of the big items that we as staff are going to need to undertake with you all's leadership is updating our 5-year HUD consolidated plan. And so that is going to be something you'll be hearing a lot about, and a lot of work will be happening behind the scenes with our community development and community and economic development department. Affordable housing bond planning. We've been having conversations kind of under the umbrella of the affordable housing plan, but we'll be having more targeted discussions on how we use those affordable housing bond dollars. And then looking more specifically at how we implement the recommendations from the affordable housing plan. So that includes a review of the housing trust fund policy, review of the land use incentive grant policy, looking at anti-displacement strategies, and then enhancing our affordable housing incentive monitoring and reporting. Having better data is going to be a key goal across the organization, and more specifically as it pertains to HCD, having better data, better demographic data, better impact data on the investments that we're making for our affordable housing tools. Also, kind of a standard item that will continue with our CDBG funding allocations, and then our housing funding allocations through HTF and other opportunities. So at a high level, that's what we're looking at. Next slide, please, Katie. I will note that staff is doing a lot of behind the scenes coordination, particularly as it looks at the entire ecosystem of affordable housing. And we as staff have a work session scheduled internally on July 26th, where staff from Community and Economic Development, as well as from Planning and Urban Design and the City Manager's Office, are going to work together to kind of map out the next year and how we sync up the regulatory work that's happening with planning, the incentive-based work that's happening with community and economic development, to make sure that we are really moving the needle and making affordable housing more accessible, easier to build, and available in our community. On August 20th, we'll provide additional details to this committee and seek feedback on our formal proposed FY 2025 work plan. Today is just a get a temperature check from you all and to let you know kind of where staff is. And then in September, based on that final work plan from this committee, staff will provide updates to advisory boards. And so that's namely the Continuum of Care, as well as the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. And then as needed, and we really want to increase the frequency of this, I think it was a great example having Brian Methvin providing an update to you all on the review work that they're doing for the former Ramada site today. But we want to have more opportunities for advisory boards and committees to report their progress directly to you, and then review planned agenda items with you all. As I mentioned, the intent behind the work plan is not to be static. It is a planning tool, but we know that things happen throughout the fiscal year that are unanticipated. New funding opportunities become available. We work in a very dynamic environment. So we do throughout the year want to provide updates to you as we have some considerations on work plan items that might need to change, or milestones that might need to be adjusted. And then annually, we want to continue having annual report updates from the advisory boards, just so that you can see kind of a snapshot of the body of work that's happening with those advisory boards. Next slide, please, Katie. So this, and Nikki, please feel free to chime in. This is a picture of the fantastic community and economic development team. I know we've got a lot of new team members, but this council committee is unique in that the majority of the work that happens from a staff side happens from one department, and that is our community and economic development department. I know you've seen some of these folks on previous HCD calls, but just wanted to give you an opportunity to see them all together at a recent retreat. And Nikki, I'm not sure if you had anything that you wanted to add.
I just, I want to take a moment just to show gratitude for all of our staff. The work that this council leads us, it's these folks that help implement your vision. And so great to have this wonderful staff team. We have a couple folks that are not pictured here, but this was just a few weeks ago as we went on a celebration of some of the hard work that's been done. So I just I just want to share that it's a great team. We're really hitting our stride, as Rachel said earlier, both in the work of this committee, the work of the work plan structure, but also just a staff team that's really come together. So just taking a moment to show some gratitude for the hard work that they do.
That's great. Thank you. I have a couple comments or questions. Could we go back? I love this photo, but could we go back a slide or two to the potential work plan topics? Councilwoman, there's one item I think that we might want to include in here, which is really just like land use. I know, so planning and economic development is having a grand discussion. We just met yesterday around the P&Z recommendations for, you know, the threshold changes and stuff. And it's specific to residential property. And I brought up whether or not this committee was going to hear about it. And the answer was really no, that things progress from PZ to council. But I do wonder, as some of that stuff comes up, you're going to hear me saying, what I wish we were doing was looking at like the hotel overlay as a tool for housing, multifamily residential overlay, where we can get more of a prescription for these large multifamily projects and maybe not have them come to council. But what I hope happens is we take what is happening with the PZ recommendations and grow on them, that we start looking at even broader ways to simplify housing. My question really is, does this committee want any of that to come to us in this next year as we talk about all this land use? Or are we comfortable with it just being at planning and economic development and planning and zoning? Are there any areas we want to layer in? Because I don't want us to lay out our whole work plan and not have that for staff's sake. Just kind of wondering if y'all have any input on that.
You would like that information to come to us just for
I'm just
information
curious.
or to take action?
Either or. I mean, some of these bigger things, like the one that's coming from P&Z is going to come to council with just a P&Z recommendation. I think multimodal maybe discussed it, but it talks specifically to housing. It may or may not loosen tools or restrictions on building without affordability, so on, simplifying the CZ process even. But I'm just kind of linking the two together, whether or not this committee feels like we need to discuss it, or not that particular item, but any land use items, like broadly speaking. Rachel, I see your hand up just a second. I didn't know if Councilwoman wanted a minute to respond.
Let's hear from Rachel and then I'll.
Okay, go ahead.
And just wanted to note, the items that you specifically mentioned, Councilmember Turner, are going to be key items that we're going to be discussing at that staff workshop in July. And so part of what we're going to be doing is sequencing when those review items are going to happen, but then also making recommendations on how that information gets messaged back to council. So I anticipate at our August 20th HCD meeting, we'll be able to work through and provide you a work plan that's going to identify items that may be going to both. They may be going to PED as well as coming to HCD, just because of the impact that they would have on affordable housing specifically, but then also in alignment with the scope of work of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. So I guess just wanted to let you know, we'll have more specifics, but that is exactly why we're doing that staff workshop, is just to make sure that we're communicating with the right groups prior to full council being asked to take action.
Okay, and I think that P&Z item, the parking restrictions and the increased threshold for residential, comes to council August 27th. So if this committee had any interest in discussing it, maybe you can even watch the PED meeting, but I'm just kind of trying to get our feel here as we set next year's work plan. And I see land use discussions coming. I'm also on PED. I just wonder if we want to do that, or if we want to wait, give staff the chance to lay it out, see what we think. If we want to share that we'd like to be involved, just kind of putting it out there for discussion.
Yeah, that's difficult for me because I guess it would depend on what was being brought forward. Like, I can actually say that I would love to have this committee included in the whole overlay discussion.
Right.
But there are other items that I think would be just fine moving forward without us. So sorry, Sage, I don't know how to answer you.
No, that's okay. It's more just for us to be brainstorming because, you know, we're going to start this work plan. We don't really need to answer today. A good example, though, is that item coming from P&Z does not include an overlay. It's just a broad citywide application of potential ordinance change. So we would have wanted to discuss it. I'm not sure.
Well, what I can say, and what I recall from the last council meeting, I believe the mayor brought it up, how important the order in which these items come is. And And with the proper order, I could see how it wouldn't be necessary to come through this group. I
Agreed.
still believe that an overlay should be discussed before any of the other changes, because I can say for me, items that I would love to support, I might not be able to support because there hasn't been an overlay discussion yet.
And I'm sensing that from our past discussions from the group too. So just kind of laying out, how would we, if we want to avoid having more of those situations in the future, how do we make sure our work plans are, touching both sides? It sounds like Rachel's on it. She's aware of what I'm trying to get at. So maybe we can see what staff come back with after their team meeting. Okay. And then any other comments or questions about this potential work plan? Anything that we might be missing or need added or want to focus on? I guess if the only thing I could see that might be out there is I also got an update from the Reparations Commission, and they may be moving forward with some stuff in implementation next year, I guess, that could possibly layer into this, or I wouldn't want it to be void in our work plan. I'm trying to treat these work plans as like our Bible for the year. Like, we're going to stick to this. This is how we become the most efficient. If it's not on the list, we put it on next year's list, kind of thing. And so if we're not touching on it as we build the work plan, it's almost like delaying it. So I guess we'll have another chance to talk about it, but be thinking about it in that regard. Go ahead, Councilwoman Mosley.
And I was really happy with the affordable housing plan. I think it would be really helpful if we also included the housing portion of the Cease the Harm audit in our board, so we can get to the equitable portion as well. There were a lot of things that were very similar.
Yep. Okay. Great. I think Rachel's taking notes. Okay. Any other thoughts or discussions on the work plan topics or planning?
I do have some really exciting news to share in that vein of implementation of Cease the Harm, and appreciate the feedback on reparations as well as Cease the Harm. Staff right now is doing some scoping around what realistically we can look at. There were 108 recommendations from the Cease the Harm audit, and we of course want to start working on all of them, but given time and resource constraints, we're going to have to be really intentional around what we prioritize. But we actually just got a technical assistance grant from the Public Finance Initiative and Law. Jamie Matthews and I are actually going to be in Boston next week for the kickoff to that technical assistance. But the focus really is around how do we have better data to measure the impact that our equity-related investments have. And that's directly aligned with the recommendation from the Cease the Harm audit, is that we need to have better data, and not having data is actually a harm in and of itself. So really excited to start that work. And we can report, especially as it pertains to the housing-related aspects, both to this committee and the Equity and Engagement Committee, how we're going to go about better tracking that data. And it's so great that we're getting some additional technical support from the outside, from a team that actually specializes in this area.
Great. That's wonderful. I like good news. Congrats, and enjoy the trip. Okay, anything else on this particular item, y'all? Okay, no action is needed. So that concludes item number 4 on our agenda, if you're listening in online or watching along. All that is left is public comment. Who is our lead today? Katie, do we have anybody queued up for public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, I guess we answered all the questions. It looks like we have an interesting future agenda item of deed review rescission. Not sure what that means, but we'll be talking about it next month. And I appreciate everybody's time and energy today, especially our partners that were able to come in and join us. Brian, thank you. And nice to hear from Friendship. And that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.